while so many others sit the fence. But if you want to know where the Word of God stands, and believe it wants to use your feet and hands, it's time to take your faith out of the seats and into the streets, and come along with me. If you only look, then you will see on WCNTV.
Welcome to today's episode of WCNTV. I'm your host, Rob Pugh, and I'm the publisher of Wisconsin Christian News, a nationally distributed Christian newspaper with vital information for everyone, not just for Wisconsin. I encourage you to check us out at our website, wisconsinchristiannews.com. There you'll find a wealth of valuable resources with over 20 years of excellent articles on a wide range of important topics from some of the best writers in the country. I'd also encourage you to subscribe to our newspaper, and you can do that on our website to receive the printed version in your mailbox each month, or the online version, or both, whatever you would prefer. In this day and age of fake news, Wisconsin Christian News is more important, and it provides a real alternative with news, commentaries, and deeply researched articles of vital importance that you can't find anywhere else. So please consider joining us as a subscriber to Wisconsin Christian News. This program, WCNTV, airs live every Wednesday at 2 o'clock Central Time, and you can watch live or later at your convenience on our TV website, WCNTV.net. And on our Wisconsin Christian News Facebook page, and on our WCNTV Facebook page. If you are a Facebook user, please do me a favor and look our pages up. And if you would, like and share our pages with others. That would help us a lot. Again, Wisconsin Christian News and WCN-TV. Well, today we're going to be discussing a topic of great importance to many, especially parents and grandparents. The topic is what's inside a children's book. Joining us here shortly will be Deborah DeGroff, who's done an excellent job of researching and writing on this topic. Her book, What's Between the Covers, deals with all of this in depth and includes extensive research that most likely is going to shock you. But I urge you to stay tuned because it's extremely important. You know, it was back in 1989 that the book for preschoolers titled Heather Has Two Mommies came out. And the goal of that was to normalize lesbian and sodomite relationships in the minds of very young children. At that time, such a thought was incomprehensible to most parents, even non-Christians. But today, Heather Has Two Mommies is softcore compared to what's out there now. In fact, even today, the Los Angeles Times calls Heather Has Two Mommies a modern classic, the perfect Mother's Day gift times two. The fact is that homosexuality has always been around, practically since the beginning of time. Since Satan will always lie and pervert God's natural order, this is one of his favorite tactics, to twist and destroy hearts, minds, and lives. But while sodomy, homosexuality has always been around, it's only lurked in the shadows until recently. Today, we have a generation of young people who have been educated in government schools and indoctrinated heavily with this stuff. And even those young people who previously never had any inclination toward this have been encouraged to try it out for themselves because you never know, it just may be right for them. Indeed, all over the world, the homosexual agenda is not only being accepted now, but encouraged and celebrated, and all of us are being forced, under the color of law, to celebrate along with them. It used to be that June was Pride Month, but now sodomite pride continues all year long. And pride, by the way, is one of the things God hates, and God's word calls sodomy an abomination, which is why the demonic world is pushing it so incredibly hard, far and wide. And no matter what those who advocate for the homosexual agenda will tell you, enough is never enough. At first, they just wanted what they called equal rights, but that advanced to special rights, to the point now where those who still believe in the sanctity of normal, natural, God-ordained marriage are shunned and viewed as hateful bigots. This is by design, and that should concern you. All this is now morphed into transgenderism, where now we readily accept that there are at least 64 different and distinct genders. Male and female, as God designed us, is considered extremely narrow-minded and, of course, bigoted and discriminatory. We're now being forced to accept and celebrate transgenderism as well. If one dares to call a so-called transgender male a male, you can lose your job or even go to jail. Yes, even right here in America. The thought police consider using the wrong pronouns a hate crime, which carries with it extra stiff penalties. And make no mistake, the normalization and celebration of pedophilia is next on their agenda. You may be interested to know that the term transsexualism was first introduced by a man named Magnus Hirschfeld all the way back in the 1920s. So this agenda has been around a long time. Today, homosex, transgenderism, and all other manner of perversion is being forced upon the youngest of children in our public government schools and local libraries. We even have drag queen story times where perverted men dressed as women hold little children on their laps and read stories to them, normalizing and celebrating what they call diversity, further indoctrinating a new generation. Any opposition to this is met with extreme force by police and stiff penalties imposed by our so-called legal system. Excuse me a second. Now let me quote from the Gay Manifesto, which is originally published in 1987. I'll be brief. We shall sodomize your sons, emblems of your feeble masculinity, of your shallow dreams and vulgar lies. We shall seduce them in your schools. Now, this treatise goes on much longer. You can read it on your own online, but you get the point. And the point is, they're after your kids, your children, and your grandchildren. Wherever there are young children, you'll find sodomy heavily promoted with rainbow flags and pride celebrations under the guise of diversity. It begins in preschool, and children are indoctrinated with all this stuff straight through college. And it's amazing to me that any young people can emerge from all those years of blatant, in-your-face indoctrination and not believe they're homosexual, or at the very least, a gay ally, which most college graduates now consider themselves to be. This is all part of the fundamental transformation of America, which is all part of the Communist Manifesto to overthrow America and turn it into a completely communist nation. Now, if you think that can't happen in America, just look at what's happened in just the last 3 months. We're well on our way, folks, and getting a hold of the minds of our children is a key factor in this transformation. Let me quote this from the Communist Manifesto. This is bullet point number 17. Get control of the schools. Use them as transmission belts for socialism and current communist propaganda. Soften the curriculum. Get control of the teachers' associations. Put the party line in textbooks. And this is where we're at, folks. They've succeeded with their agenda while we were sleeping. I could easily go on, but you get the point. I just wanted to give you an introduction on what we're dealing with today. As I said, our guest today is Deborah DeGroff, author of the book Between the Covers, What's Inside a Children's Book. Her book includes a parental advisory because it contains the whole truth. I wonder, Jared, if we can put that book cover up on the screen there for folks to see. Now, this book is explicit because it describes what passes today for children's literature, which, by the way, is often required reading in public schools. Deborah's website is what'sinsidechildrensbooks.com, and her book is not for the faint of heart, but it contains vital information that you need to be aware of for the sake of your children and your grandchildren. So stay tuned. Deborah, thank you for joining us today.
Well,
And
thank you for
I
having me.
truly appreciate you taking your time out to share this important information with us.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm honored that you asked.
Tell us a little bit about your book and how things got started. What's the background?
Well, over 30 years ago, when our oldest child was learning to read, we, like many, many parents, started going to the library. And as my son was choosing books, I started glancing at all of the new special books that were coming in. And I started checking them all out because juvenile books don't take very long to read. And I had always been a voracious reader. So as I started reading these, there was just something different about them that was unsettling. Let's put it that way to begin with. So I started reading more and more and more. And eventually I started trying to tell other parents, and I realized that no one knew what was inside the covers of a children's book. We tended to pick things from how they looked by the covers. And so I think, going along with what you were just saying in your introduction, many parents, including homeschoolers, wonder, where did my child pick up an idea like that? And just as the Bible says, line upon line and precept upon precept, these seeds are planted when the children are very, very young. And so you just keep repeating and repeating and repeating. And pretty soon, capitalism is bad. America is bad. I mean, all these things. And you say it often enough, and pretty soon that instills in them, that's their idea and their worldview.
Well, reading is considered, I guess still considered a good thing. And parents, and especially homeschool parents, they love to visit the library and turn their kids loose in the children's section, and they think they're safe there. But oftentimes they're really not, are they?
No, they're not. And you just hit the nail on the head. Parents assume that the books are safe and that they are neutral. And let's face it, homeschoolers tend to read more than public school. So a lot of times when I'm talking, people think that this only affects children that are in public school, but homeschool children are reading these same types of books. So it's very important that we become aware of what to look for and what these books involves. Many people think that it just starts in the young adult, but it actually starts in the preschool literature. We have preschool to early readers, then you have juvenile literature, and then you have young adult, which the normal range is 9th to 12th grade for that age group.
Yeah, and like I mentioned, we now have drag queen story time for the little kids, and
Yeah.
that's just an absolute perversion. But some of the worst stuff is like I mentioned, required reading in public schools. And I've heard from parents who've had their kids come home and shown them some of their required reading and have been outraged, even going to the school boards to try to get it removed, and they're immediately labeled as censors, and they pull out the censorship card, and it seems
Right.
like anything goes in the public
Right.
schools. So, but you mentioned in the introduction of your book about a sippy cup. Tell
Yeah.
us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think that's a little amusing to people, but this was real important to me, and my web designer actually created the image for me, so I really want to thank Vicki. But I have 14 grandchildren. And so I was looking up one day about a sippy cup, because every one you purchase, you regret. It leaks or it does this or that, okay? And
Yep.
then you have a whole cabinet full and all you have is sippy cups that don't work. So I was looking up, and before you even get to the reviews on a product, many of them have questions. And there was 150 some questions just about a sippy cup. And you cannot believe the questions, the recycle number, if you could use your wine in it, and on and on and on. And I thought, how is it that people could be so concerned about a sippy cup that's less than $15 and ask 156 questions, but we don't ask anything about who is influencing our children, what they're reading, what they're watching. And so I included a shovel because we need to be asking more questions, but sometimes you've got to dig from the answers to those questions, and you've got to dig yourself. So the shovel's there to remind you of that.
Okay. Yep, we do definitely need to dig, do our own research because other people aren't going to do it for us or tell us about it. They're going to sneak it in,
Yes.
hoping that the parents never find out.
Mhm.
But tell us about the content. What are we actually talking about here? And we can move to slide number 2 here.
Yeah. Well, okay. We're not ready for the
Oh, okay,
profanity
sorry,
one, but
sorry.
that's okay. But in the content, it isn't just sexual. But if we're going to talk about the sexual, this would happen more in your young adult literature. Okay, you can have everything. You can have the kind of sex that somebody would only learn about if you were watching hardcore porn. You can have sadomasochism. All of these things are detailed in graphic description. Um, and if I go to show a parent one of those books, their reaction is to ask little Johnny, have you read that book? And if little Johnny says, no, I haven't read that book, the parent just breathes a sigh of relief and says, whew, I don't have anything to worry about. But what about all the other books? So I sit here and I say, do you really think it's just one book? What if I show you 5? What if I show you 10? What if I show you 50, 100, or 1,000? Will that make a difference to you to understand that there are issues with the content, whether it's sexual, whether it's just pure propaganda, indoctrination, anti-American sentiment, everything, any book I think that's published today in the secular world for children is anti-Christian. What will it take to make parents look between the covers?
You know, just as kind of an aside point, when it comes to movies, there is a website out there that tells you specific. You can look up specific movies and find out, what the content is regarding profanity, nudity, sexuality, that kind of thing. Is there such a thing out there for books?
Okay, I used a whole chapter of my book to deal with this issue because there's 2 questions I always get asked. And one of those is, do I have a list? So people always want a good list and a bad list, and you will never get that from me. And I'll tell you why. There are dozens of lists out there from Christian organizations, from very good people. And I can tell you, I can go through the list and I could tell you why I would choose another book over that one. Okay. Um, it's an individual thing with parents. And I use as an illustration, if you have young children and you want them to take vitamins, a lot of parents will spend hours and hours and hours choosing the right vitamin for their child. And it's the same thing with books. You cannot uh, just give that right to someone else to choose for your children. You choose everything else. You choose where you shop for their clothing. You choose what pediatrician you take them to. You make decisions for your children every day of their life. And this is a decision that parents need to make. Yes, there are guides that you can look at. There are descriptions that you can look at, but some of those we might be talking about later. They're very, very misleading. When we get to the next subject, I'll bring that up. You cannot trust the reviews and the descriptions.
Okay. One of the things you mentioned was a book called Run the Game by Jason Myers. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, we can go ahead and put the next slide up on that. With Run the Game, there are over 1,300 F words. That's variations of the word, okay? And there's over 900 other what we would call choice words. And I know this is hard for people to take, but I want you to listen to my words carefully. Those 2,000 words are probably the tamest part of the book. Now, this is a book that is published by the children's division, publishing division of Simon and Schuster.
Okay, what about the other one we have here on the slide, Exit Here, again by
Okay.
Jason Myers?
Okay, Exit Here actually in this fictional storyline actually includes the authentic 2 porn sites, the addresses.
And
Now
these
think
are
about
for
that.
children.
These are for young adults. Okay, these are published by the children's publishing division of Simon and Schuster. I mean, there's nothing tame in either of these books. I mean, many of these things you would actually have to Google to find out what they're doing.
Okay. Let's specifically talk about, I guess, why don't we take it from the youngest to the oldest, specifically speaking on the youngest of children. What's out there for them?
Okay, well, on my website recently, what'sinsidechildrensbooks.com, I posted an article in which I put a table with 45 books that you can look up for yourself on YouTube. I have the links to them, and you can hear somebody, drag queens and everybody in between, reading these books to children on YouTube. So the parent, some of these are only 2 minutes long. Most of these books are around 32 pages. So you can listen to the books, you can see the pictures. You do not have to take my word for anything. You can see for yourself if there is propaganda, what that propaganda is, what the message is that your children are receiving. Now, most of these books are for 4 to 8-year-old children. Some of them are for even earlier than that. Okay? Now, when you take a little book like Brave Girl about Clara Lemlich was a communist. Her son was also a communist who worked with the Soviets and is mentioned in the Venona Project. But in this particular book, they have her as a child. And this is the shirt makers' strike of 1909. And that book, it says that the police arrested her 16 or 17 times. They broke 6 of her ribs. Now, I'm not here to argue with you whether or not they broke 6 of her ribs or how many times they arrested her. I don't know. But is that something you've got to picture a 4-year-old hearing this story? What is a 4-year-old to think? The policeman broke 6 of her ribs, especially in the climate that we're living in today and these last few months. And so some topics they're real. We don't deny that they're real, but are they age appropriate for these children? Are they necessary? And how are they dealing with that subject matter?
Oops, sorry.
There we go.
I'm back.
Okay.
You mentioned that you devoted an entire article to the book Brave Girl on your website.
Yes.
If you could, and you also mentioned to me that you wanted to address one specific page. Can we get that slide up?
Slide 4. Yes.
Slide 4. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
There we go.
Okay. There we go. Now, notice that clenched fist on the left side of the page.
Yep, that's commonplace today, isn't it?
Yes. Okay. Now, I also want a parent to notice, because I want them, as they read these books, you can't put yourself in the mindset of an adult. You have to remember these are being read to children. What's the child going to take away? A 4-year-old child does not know history. They don't know economics. They don't know science, geography, and probably don't know how to read. So what are they going to take away? And you notice the name of the book is brave girl. Clara Limlick immigrated to this country when she was 17 years old. At the time of this strike, she was 23. But as you listen to the book, notice at how many times she's referred to as a child that should have been in school, playing and talking and conversing with the other girls. But instead, see, she's working in this factory. There were younger children, I mean, as young as 12. I mean, you can prove that worked in the factories, but that was not the norm. And in this book also, I don't have the picture up, but I'll bring this up to you. They said instead of carrying their books or lunchbox, whatever it was, to school, they're carrying their sewing machines. Now, I want you to think about that. That machine at that time with that wooden case and that metal sewing machine would have been somewhere around 60 pounds. And they have her carrying it like a pocketbook. Okay, do you really think that hundreds of workers showed up to one room and they each brought their own sewing machines, and then we dumped those wooden cases somewhere in a pile in the corner? They had industrial machines at this time that were mounted to the floor so that you had less vibration. But do you see, they'll go to any lengths to put a picture in the mind of these children that it was these little girls that should have been in school. Now, when we go to the next page, this is where I was telling you the police arrest her 17 times. Yes. Okay. Each time Clara leads a walkout, the bosses fire her. Each time she pickets, her life is in danger. Now, remember, she's a little girl. Okay. The bosses hire men to beat her and the other strikers. They arrest her 17 times. They break 6 of her ribs, but they can't break her spirit because it's shatterproof.
So what is the agenda behind this particular book?
Well, you tell me. First of all, I guess you would have to ask yourself, why was it, was the issue really here a shirtwaist makers strike, or was the focus Clara Limlick? If so, of course, Clara Limlick, she wasn't card carrying at that time, but she did become an official communist. And her son, of course, was a communist, like I said, that was mentioned in the Venona papers. And of course, the Venona Project was where the Soviets was where we decrypted, the communications between the Soviets and, all the information they were doing. So anyway, it's very curious why a book on Clara Limlick or the shirtwaist makers strike would be important to a 4 to 8-year-old child. I guess these are the things that we need to be asking. When these children don't know history yet, they probably don't know how to read, or if they do, they're not reading well yet. But the most important thing for them to learn is about Clara Limlick. I think that's curious.
Yeah, and especially, the imagery of the clenched fist, which we're seeing everywhere now with, Antifa and all of the left-wing groups that are rioting. We're starting the young children off to think that this is a normal thing to do, and while it seems to me that the book is decrying the faults of communism and yet still pushing it at the same time. So
yes,
yeah. So
yeah.
But getting back to I guess the 45 books you have listed, you have a table of 45 books. What
Yes.
messages are the youngest of children receiving?
Oh, wow. The social activism, which I have a whole chapter in my book about that starts creating social activists when they're preschoolers.
I'm sorry. Let me back up a little bit here because we
Okay.
missed slides 7, 8, 9, and 10.
Okay.
Maybe we can go through those quickly.
Okay. All right. Now you'll notice once again, you see the clenched fist. Okay. These are activist books for children. We just covered The Brave Girl, another book, and this one, Occupy Wall Street, recommends for 2-year-olds and up, by the way. Amazon does it, I think, 3 to 7. And this one covers everything from the, power to the people, the corporate vultures, the LGBTQ rights, just, and environmental justice. This one covers it all, and it's just a board book for children. So we can go on to the next slide. Okay, this slide is called Enough, 20 Protesters Who Changed America. And so this just has a little blurb about 20 people. The only real information that's given is in the back of the book. And so, they talk about Yoko Ono and John Lennon and their I forget exactly what you call it, but was their bed for peace, where they laid in bed for days, or Colin Kaepernick and taking the knee. All of these are the heroes or the protesters who changed America. So this is what your young children are learning.
And what age group is this one
It's
supposed to be for?
It's either 4 to 8 or 3 to 7. I don't have that exactly in front of me.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. They're all young children. So you can go on to the next slide. Okay, this one is Peaceful Fights for Equal Rights. And so you look at this book for 3 to 7 or 4 to 7, and look what we're teaching them. Remember, we're not showing this book to you. We're teaching this book to a child. Resist. What's your 4-year-old going to resist? It talks about assembling. It talks about boycotting. It talks about filing a lawsuit. Really? We're talking about 4-year-old kids. What are they doing? And there again, you can see in the screen on that top left picture, you can see that clenched fist again. See, and basically, yeah, this book, when they're talking about equal rights, really what they're talking about here is LGBT rights, of course.
Well, yeah, and on the book cover itself, you've got the
rainbow
satellite flag, and in the other picture on the top left, you've got the equal sign.
Yes.
And of course, we have the Muslim little girl there depicted. It's totally anti-American, anti-Christianity, anti-God.
Yeah.
Marketed to young kids.
They're considered diversity. Right. That's their title. So they're sold and published under that. Yeah. So do we have another slide on that? Okay. Yeah, this one, Stonewall. Okay, this is by the same author as the previous slide. And this starts out with the history of Stonewall Inn. And, and then of course it branches out to, this is where it became acceptable that Stonewall, they welcomed men loving men and women loving women. And, and now, let's see, it said now 2 men who love each other or 2 women who love each other can marry. It all began one night here at the Stonewall Inn when 2 old horse stables became part of history. Now, you understand, you might have already had people on your show that talks about the truth of the Stonewall riots and what was really going on and really happening. But when you've got a little tiny children's book with very few words, you have to understand that most of the story is omitted. Those 4-year-old children are only getting the words that they want to impress upon those very, very young minds that have no way of sorting out whether it's even true or false.
Wow. This is, the only word I have for this is sick. When I was a kid, my favorite book as a little kid was Town Mouse, Country Mouse. So whatever happened to things like that? Now we're teaching them this?
Yeah. And
unbelievable.
another thing I want to bring up. Okay, we've already discussed these kids probably can't read. They don't know, they don't have an education at all. And yet you're totally indoctrinating this. So when you're telling them to assemble, you're telling them to boycott, you're telling them to do this or that, and you're showing them with all of these signs they're holding up, I guarantee you it wasn't a child that thought up all of those words on those signs, or possibly even wrote them on the signs. These children are not acting on what they know is right. These children are flat out being exploited. And whether it is a conservative side or whether it's this type of side, it is wrong to exploit these children. They're not ready to do this. They don't understand what they're doing.
Well, and we've seen this played out in real life. It's not just books. It's not just
Yes.
children's
Yes.
stories.
Right.
For the last several years, I've been part of a group that goes to Columbus, Ohio, and ministers
Mhm.
on the streets at the Sodomite Pride Parade. They're not
Yeah.
having it this year, obviously, because of the
Right. The virus.
pandemic
Yeah.
situation. But um, you would be astounded at the number of little kids that are
Yes.
not only being taken there by their parents to watch
Mm-hmm.
the parade and celebrate the parade and wave the
Mm-hmm.
flags, but they're actually forced to be in the parade. And honestly, to look at the faces of those kids
Yeah.
that are forced to march by their parents,
Yeah.
so-called parents, in the parade, they're just they're sad. The kids are sad. They're confused. They don't understand this. It is not natural. They know instinctively, even at 2 and 3 years old, that this stuff is not natural. Now,
Yeah.
last year, I made up a sign that my wife was holding that said, I don't remember the exact words, but I think it said something like, "Do you think this is appropriate for young children to view?" And that made the sodomites in the parade just absolutely
Yeah.
furious
Yeah.
because they knew what they were doing. It just made them absolutely furious. They came up behind my wife, kicked her knees out from under her from behind, stole the sign, and ran off with it. They could not stand that one particular message.
No,
So,
they talk about free speech all the time. They like to say that we're book censors and on and on and on, but they will not allow our voice. They cannot tolerate a difference of opinion.
no, even if you stand outside a public library where a drag queen
Mm.
story time is going on, you will be arrested and you will be
Hmm.
jailed. So,
Yes.
even if you stand outside, if you dare go inside, you might as well just
Hmm.
call it quits. So, I mean, you're taking your life in your own hands. But what other messages are people getting, young kids getting?
Well, one of those, okay, well, this one that he's showing right now, Greta and the Giants and Our House is on Fire.
Yeah,
I,
Greta Thunberg,
yeah,
the
yeah,
new hero
yeah,
of
that's
the
right.
world.
You know who they call Saint Greta. Okay.
Yeah,
But this book starts out with, this one is for 3 to 8-year-olds. So I want you to picture 3-year-olds hearing this story. And it begins, with one day, Greta's teacher talked to the class about the climate, about how our planet is getting warmer, about how the polar ice is melting, about how animals' lives are threatened, and ours too. So Greta read for hours and she watched film after film about our warming world. Okay, and then it says in the book, Greta's saying this, there might not be a world to live in when she grows up. What use is school without a future? What can I do? And then the word spread, and she says, if parents won't act to save the planet, children will. Okay. And I mean, uh, you know, it's always children who have to change the minds and the worldview of the parents now. It's not parents leading and guiding their children. It's the children leading the parents. And if you remember when she gave her speech at Davos in Switzerland, she said, I don't want you to be hopeful. I want you to panic. I want you to feel the fear that I feel every day. I want you to act as if the house is on fire because it is. That was her statement. And so anyway, that's what your 3-year-olds are expected to listen to. And if you look at some of those signs there's more of them in the book, you'll see those little children didn't write those. They didn't come up with those things on their own. So, okay.
Well, yeah, I don't know about you folks, but I had no idea that this stuff was out there for kids this age.
There's even one book that's basically polyamory. It's a little girl, and I don't think I have a pic. Yeah, maybe hold there. Yeah, okay. Do you see down there the third from the bottom right, the Elsie Marie and her 7 little daddies? Okay, so she
Wow.
has a mommy and she has 7 little daddies. Now, what they don't tell you in our North American copy is that in Sweden, where this originated, they have a picture of the big mommy with the 7 daddies and Else Marie in the bathtub. Which is quite interesting.
Hmm.
Yeah, and
Well, as
so
I said, it's, this is all, the ultimate goal is pedophilia. And, it's right now it's people just use LGBT, but it's LGBTQ and then P and then plus, because anything
yeah,
goes. And this is what they're pushing. But why don't we
yeah.
go through each one of these, if I think we have time, and just give us a brief synopsis of what each one is about, starting from
Okay,
the top
okay,
left.
we'll go through some of these, okay? Because
Yeah.
what makes a baby? That's by Corey Silverberg. And this one, I have a copy sitting right here. In this book, you see how they draw people where you can't tell whether there's a man or a woman or what, okay? They're just like generic blocks. And so they will have them in all different colors. And there's no reference to mother, father, male, female, anything like that. So a male can have a uterus, and a female can have sperm. Okay, or any of that. That's how they convey this
So
book.
how then do they explain what makes a baby if they're not being
Okay,
truthful?
well, what he talks about is the sperm meets the egg, and they have a dance. And as they get together, okay, we don't have to continue that. But what they're doing is now, let's just say, with homosexual couples, all right. So if they're, basically, they've got to have these in vitro. They're not having these babies naturally. So let's say there's 2 homosexual men. Well, one of them can be the biological, right? But you can't be the other. So what they're doing, they were hiring surrogates. Okay. But a lot of times then when it got down to it, the surrogate decided to keep the baby. So now what they're doing, and it's a huge, huge market buying eggs. There's a very informative book out there called Confessions of a Serial Donor, because in the colleges now, they are advertising in Ivy League papers that they're wanting egg donors. And this is big money. These kids are using this, to get through college. A lot of them, they're donating the eggs. So whereas a surrogate might have decided to keep the baby, now you're buying an egg, and what you like is somebody that has a perfect SAT score and looks just a certain way. But then you're having that egg implanted in a oven. Basically, that's what they call them. So you've got the egg donor, you've got the oven, and then you've got the sperm. And that's what this book is pushing. And so he also, when you open up the book, there's also a little address where you can go to a reader's guide. And in that reader's guide, he's basically teaching you how to explain all of these things to your children. And one of those things is, it was about 2 lesbians. And he says, Uncle Jack donated the sperm in a cup. And then the one mother helped insert it into the other mother. And this is what they talk about. In Corey Silverberg, it would take you less than a minute to look up and see who Corey Silverberg is. They have these big masturbation, not a conference, but activities every year. And you'll have him writing blogs about how that's the best thing in the world and he can't wait to participate. This is Corey Silverberg. These are the authors that we're reading these books that are getting published. So sorry to make such a long rant on that one, but that one is very, very disturbing.
Well, the next one, titled "I Have a Right to Be a Child," that sounds innocent enough, doesn't it?
Well, it sounds innocent, and I don't have the notes in front of me for "I have a right to be a child," but these are the ones that tell you, you have a right not to be hot, too hot. I mean, I don't know about you, but when I grew up, I didn't even know anybody had air conditioning. In the summer, it got hot, okay? But it's like anything that inconveniences you, they're taught that they have a right for that not to happen. Like you have a right to have the best kind of food. You have the right to have the best kind of medical treatment. I don't know about you, but my guess is every time you have a sniffle, you can't decide just to run to the doctor, because most of us have insurance, and basically what the insurance does is send us letters telling us why they can't pay for something. Okay, so that when you go to a doctor for frivolous things, you're going to have to pay for it. Is it worth it to you? Is it worth it to you? And so, they're just taught that everything is basically a human right and everything has to be catered to. So,
So, yeah, it's the entitlement mentality, which is, just another word for training young kids to be good socialists.
yeah, let's
Yeah.
jump down to the last column where it says "in our mother's house." And she's a very, very well-known writer of books for young children. And of course, this one is about two lesbian mothers that have adopted these children. One of them is a pediatrician in the story, and the other one, if I'm remembering correctly, was a paramedic. And so they're like superhuman. I sew, okay? So I know what it's like to sew. But they have her coming home from being a pediatrician all day, and there's going to be some kind of mother's tea at school or somewhere. And so she makes dresses for both mothers and both daughters, your flowing dresses and things like that for them to wear to the tea. And this is just in 2 or 3 nights. Well, I want to tell you something. I couldn't have got the pattern and laid everything out and cut out all the pieces for that dresses, but they're only superhuman. And then you contrast it with somebody who disagrees with them. And you see how they're only smiling, but the person that disagrees with their lifestyle is only snarling. They're most likely a Christian, and they're nasty and nobody likes them, and they're the bullies.
Hateful
And
bigots.
yes,
That's their phrase, hateful bigots.
and so these are the messages these young children are picking up. And of course, I'm sure everybody's familiar with Tango Makes Three or The Gender Wheel. And Feminist Baby, the lady who wrote that works for BuzzFeed. She used to work for Sesame Street. And she's also the creator of what they call, I think it's the Amazing Cupcake or something like that. So if you look up her name and Google something with cupcake, look up those and see what types of things that they write for adults. And I guess you have to ask yourself, if I knew that you wrote, say, pornography, do I want to read your books for children? This is why I don't make lists. This is up to the parents. The parents need to ask them all of these questions. If somebody wrote 8 books in a series and one of them somewhere in the middle teaches all of these things that you don't want your children to, just downright confusing propaganda indoctrination, do you want the children to read all the books in the series, but that one, if they happen to like them? Do you want them to read none at all? These are your decisions. You're the parent.
Yep, parents need to do their homework.
Yes.
If we can, I am intrigued by the one at the top called Red, a crayon story.
Okay.
I assume that
Uh-huh.
has something to do with race, and since that's kind of relevant nowadays, maybe you could talk about that a little bit.
Well, I'll tell you what, that one's about transgender.
Oh,
Because
okay.
you see,
Sorry, I was wrong.
it's mislabeled. You see, it's obviously a blue crayon, but its label says red. So
Oh,
you know
okay.
it has to be red. So, it's supposed to color the red strawberry into this and to that. And no matter what it does, it's never right. And so one day somebody asked red to draw the ocean, and it does. And of course, it's blue. And so now we know, that he was always blue inside. So, yes, this one is a transgender.
Hmm. Crazy. Ah, let's talk about The Garden by Elsie Adenoff.
Okay, that's, yes, slide 13.
Yeah.
Okay, this one is, I want to read you a few excerpts from that. Okay.
Okay. It appears to me on the surface to be all about feminism and rewriting scripture. But tell us,
Okay,
Deborah.
yeah, there is a feminist message in here. By the way, the V in Adenoff is Vanderbilt. Yes, the Vanderbilts. Okay, but the garden has four characters: Adam, Eve, God, and the serpent. Okay, that's the only four characters in the book. Now, this is her description of God. He can be a little impatient and impetuous. God could be short-tempered. He didn't like us to think for ourselves. I never believed God could be so selfish and so blind. God must be around. Only he could cause this chaos. God is not always rational. And it goes on and on and on and on, her description of God, just like that. On the other hand, the serpent is the wise one. Okay. He's the kind one, the wise one. He's described as wisdom, justice, and reason. So anyway, one of the techniques when you have books like this, number one, I just established there's four characters in this book. So how are you going to discredit the Bible any further if you have to stay within the garden? So she uses her author's creative license, and we create 5 dreams. Okay, so now you've opened it up where you could put anything in this book. So I want to read one of those dreams to you. In this dream, Eve has a daughter, and she's trying to protect that daughter from the rising waters. And a great ark appears, and the rope is hanging down its side. She lifts her daughter so she can climb up the rope. A man, wonder who that is, he leans over the side with a broom and begins to strike her. And he says, quote, "She can't come up. We have a full contingent, all our twos. We're not allowed to save anyone else." "Who says so?" I shout. "God," comes the answer. "It's God's command." The broom handle strikes my daughter full in the face. Now, there's 4 more dreams like that. But you have to understand, she created this God that is evil and the serpent that is so wise. And in an article, in an interview she did in The Guardian, she stated, "But for myself, I have no faith, certainly not in a Christian God." Now, this is very telling. In the process of writing this book, in fact, Christianity has come to seem more and more unlikely. Well, if you had created the God she just created and called it Christianity, you wouldn't want to have a part of it either. But the children do not understand. This is not the God we serve. This is not the God of the Bible.
And this is
For ninth to 12th graders.
reading level 4 to 7, fourth grade to 7th month,
No,
fourth
no,
grade.
it is. If you're an average child in the 4th grade, in the 7th month of 4th grade, you should be capable of reading this book. Yes. But it's for 9th to 12th grade interest levels.
And is this available in public schools?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
I gauge things by, I've even found them at yard sales, so it means it's a little common.
Wow.
Okay. All right.
Whatever happened to the separation of church and state in the schools?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
See, Christianity is open game. That book, uh, I would recommend that people read that article on my website. It's called "The Counterfeit God" or "Creating a Counterfeit God." Yeah,
Okay.
because there's a lot more to that book. Now, The Serpent King. This one is very interesting because this one is also about a pastor. Okay, this pastor happens to have a church that are snake handlers. Okay, so it said, this is from the book, everyone assumed he'd get in trouble someday for the 27 or so rattlesnakes and copperheads his congregants passed around each Sunday. No one knew with certainty what law they were breaking, but it seemed unlawful somehow. And the Tennessee Department of Wildlife did take custody of the snakes after the arrest, or people thought perhaps he'd run afoul of the law by inducing the flock to drink diluted battery acid and strychnine. But what you find out that isn't what he was arrested for. What he was arrested for was child porn. You see, these are your depictions when you get ministers, when you get, there's another book for kids called Freak Show, and this was by a drag queen. And in there, they list scripture, real scripture, all the way through the book. And the way they counteract it is by describing the Christians in such a hateful manner, like the Bible bells, those overly scrubbed Christian girls. But don't be fooled by the crosses around their necks. These girls are the coldest of all the cold-blooded killers here today, the worst of the bunch, because when they're being hateful for God.
Connor, can we bring that image up of the Freak Show book?
I don't have. Oh, I do have that on there.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I forgot I had it.
Okay.
Yeah.
And again, just tell us what age group this is supposed to be for.
Okay. This would be for upper grades, but it's written again on a fourth grade, second month reading level. Now, what is interesting about this, James St. James was one of the club kids. The club kids were active in New York City, and they were paraded on the Donahue and the Joan Rivers and Geraldo, all of those shows in the 80s, okay, or late 80s. And these were drag queens. And so James St. James now works for World of Wonder, which when the kids read the book, that's listed on the back jacket where they can look that up. And when he worked for World of Wonder, which he still does, he had a daily freak show that you see there. Now, from the picture, you can tell what these daily freak shows were about. There's well over 100 of these episodes. You can get on YouTube and you can watch any of them. But what's interesting is all of them, except for maybe the first one or two, at the end of the book, you're going to see that image where they show the book and they say Freak Show by James St. James in stores now. Now, what is your audience that is watching your daily freak show?
Probably after school teenagers.
Well, this is your trannies, your drag queens, because, they go to all the tranny clubs and the things like that. So this is your adult audience watching that. So who are they selling the book to for the children in their lives?
Right.
See, this is the book they're selling. And he was deliberately asked specifically by Dutton to write this book for children. Very interesting.
Yes, it is very interesting. I personally am blown away and can't believe this hour has gone so fast. But there is much more information that you need to get, and it is all available in Deborah's book. And bring that up again, Connor, if you would. Between the covers, what's inside a children's book, there is a parental advisory. It is graphic, but it does give you the truth, and it will give you resources that you need. And honestly, parents and grandparents need to understand this stuff. I would commend to you Deborah's website. And again, that is What's Inside. Can you tell, is it what'sinsideachildrensbook.com?
what's inside childrensbooks.com. No apostrophes or anything. It's just all
Okay,
lowercase. Yes.
got it. What's inside childrensbooks.com.
Yes.
All right. Well, Deborah, thank you for being here. I truly appreciate it. You've been very enlightening, and I'm sure that probably the vast majority of our viewers have never heard this before. So thank you. Thank you for
Thank,
being here.
thank you so much for having me.
Okay.
Thank you.
God bless. Folks, we'll see you next week, Wednesday, 2 o'clock Central Time, as usual, on WCNTV. Thank you. See you. Bye.